Hello, everyone. I'm Jeanclaude Mystic, and welcome to this very special War Correspondent report. With me tonight is the one and only Mr. Clif High. You can find him at Clif_High here on Twitter, as well as on his Substack at Clif High. Clif, welcome back to the show. How are you, man?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Clif, everything's batshit crazy, man. It's just getting worse and worse by the day.
It is.
Oh my God. I saw a post by Elon Musk earlier today. He said the simulation is sending us a message. There's this giant phallus-shaped iceberg off the coast of Dildo, Newfoundland.
Yeah. Okay, so this is not an accident, people. This is consciousness communicating to us and enjoying the joke. That's something I wanted to talk about too, was the complexity of the simulation.
Okay, well, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
And speaking of joining us into the joke, thank you everyone for joining us into the woo here tonight on the War Correspondent Show. We're triple casting on YouTube, Twitter, and also on Rumble. We're going to stay on YouTube maybe for a good 10 minutes here to begin with and spend some time with you guys. But then we'll move over the conversation to Rumble and X so that we can have a full, uncensored, and no holds barred conversation here with Mr. High. Clif, just a couple of weeks ago, we hit #1 and #4 here on Rumble. There's more and more people coming to the woo. You had forecasted that last year as we were looking at the death of the mainstream news. We're very excited for that. We're very humble for that as well. But at the same time, I'm finding that sometimes in our episodes now, we kind of have to go back to go forward. We're getting so many new people to the fore, and they don't yet understand all the lexicon, and they don't understand the background of the things we're talking about. So to set the stage for tonight's War Correspondent Show, Clif, I think it's important to go back on the idea and the prediction of hyper novelty. You had picked that at the end of 2023. You said that the earlier onset people might feel the effects of it in January, most of the woo people in April, and here sometime in June or July of 2024, the masses. And it appears we've hit that wave now with the last debate. But just for the sake of the conversation here, for people who don't know what we're talking about, go back to the Webbot Data's this theme of hyper novelty. What did it mean for you at the time, and where are we at now on this timeline of it taking shape and form here in our reality, Clif?
So hypernovelty first came into the data to the point, as a set, to the point where it could be labeled in, I want to say maybe mid 2022, and it built up over time. So of course, always the meaning changes because more words pile in. But the descriptor sets in there were describing a situation where for everyone, there would be no authority any longer. Okay, the concept of a hierarchical power structure in any realm from which an authority could derive power was going to disappear, and that this would be very, very, very impacting on the normies, and to a certain degree less so the more awake you were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hypernovelty was really described as a situation where there was so much information coming out, and there was so much categorical attempt to meet it with disinformation that basically the normies would not know what to believe. But they would come to understand as we cross this point into hypernovelty, right? And it's a gradient. So, it really didn't affect me because I was watching it develop in the data sets. But lots of people told me that in January, a lot of the woo people were saying, "Hey, I see it. It's starting to creep out," and they were quite right. Okay, so the hyper novelty though crossed this threshold to where it's not possible to go back any longer for the normies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they could be in denial up to this point where we crossed into hyper novelty itself, into 100% into this realm. Even in being in denial, it's going to end up crashing their world constantly. The description of the hypernovelty was that we would have a situation where, because there's no authority, then who do you believe? Who do you accept as a truthful person relative to your concerns? Health, money, family guidance, whatever auto mechanics. It doesn't matter what it is. If there's no authority in place, then you have to come up with a new way of thinking about your situation. And basically what's happened is that authority has been pushed back onto everyone, and the normies are not really prepared to deal with it.
And do you think that the timeline for that has changed since you first forecasted it? Are we dead on it? Are we ahead of it? How
I
has
think
it changed?
it's coming in very rapidly. Okay,
Yeah,
so that was a guess as to when we would cross a threshold for the normies. We may indeed have crossed it 15 or 20 days early, and then of course the debates here, totally stripped out the idea of political authority.
right,
Fauci did away with medical authority.
right.
Whoever the current plagiarist is at Harvard did away with education authority.
Mhm.
All of the DEI and all of this other stuff has destroyed all of the institutional authority. And so we're there now, right? There's
Mhm.
no recovery to this. You cannot, with all these DEI hires in place, recreate uh, the external image and external emotional attachments for the FBI as a law enforcement agency. They're not going to recover it at all. All right. So they can recover, but under their current circumstances, they're not approaching any of this stuff correctly. Same thing with Department of Homeland Security and these kind of things. They are not able to be resurrected once that authority mantle has been removed from them. And so so you have to appreciate the irony of this. I mean, like the massive, massive irony, right?
Right.
Because here we have an individual who was deprived of power and by illegal means, who is using legal means and a precise legal strategy to battle that, and in that process is destroying the authority that the enemy might have had. Right
Mhm.
now, the real issues are going to be once we come through through that political aspect of it, right? We still have no authority. Who's going to believe anybody in academia? Fauci and all these virologists came out of academia. All of
Right.
the Fort Detrick and all these labs created the virus that killed all the people and this kind of thing, right? So basically, fuck their authority. And
Mhm.
at this stage, we are going to have to rebuild our civilization and our social order in a way that most people had not anticipated. Not simply getting out there and repairing the buildings that were burned down by the riots. Okay, it's
Right.
much more complex than that. And this brings up the other issue, which is okay. So, all right. So hyper novelty. All right. So I see it in the data, and I see it rising in a fairly large way, coincident with like crossing the M9 point in our orbit, right? So that we're getting 100% of the solar system is now being bathed, or Earth is in a part of our solar system which is now 100% being bathed in greater amounts of energy from a galactic center. All of these things were coincident with each other, the rise of hypernovelty, the rise of these extra energies, and so on. And it comes to a point where it's irreversibility at that stage, and we're basically into it now. And we won't be going back, and it's going to get a lot more intense as we learn to adjust to it. But here's the thing: our human social order was very primitive up until, let's say, 3 months ago. Okay. And somewhere in these past 3 months or so, we crossed this threshold within the hyper novel, or propelled by the hyper novelty, but not controlled by it or anything. We crossed this threshold out of our old social order into the new sci-fi world. And there is a dramatic difference between the two that I had not anticipated as being as meaningful as it is, as being as fundamentally meaningful as it is. And that is that we used to live in a simple tribal society. Over time, we make that tribal society more complicated by developing interrelationships with other tribes and so on, right? But it's basically tribal society all the way down.
Mhm.
And even with the nation states and so on. In these last 3 months or so, we crossed out of this simple with complications on top of it social order into a complex social order. And the difference is the way we have to approach our understanding of these things, because there are existential clues that universe provides to us on this, that if we miss them could end us. All right.
Right.
Okay. And so the complexity aspect of this needs to be investigated, not with reductionism, not with our old academic style of thinking, but with an entirely new perspective. And it gets very scary because it's going to be very easy to make mistakes in so doing, right? But our complexity came about as or was marked. Okay, a marker for it was the percentage of us guys that started thinking about and dealing with UFOs in a realistic, non-religious kind of a way. And this includes militaries and so on. It's now crossed a threshold to maybe 35% of the how do I say this, of the global population that gets on the internet and discusses such things, because you can't discuss such things in specific language in Muslim countries, right? You've always got to preface it with, with this angel, that angel kind of thing.
Right.
It's a terrible example, but you take my point. So we've crossed that threshold. There's enough people thinking about it that we've now entered into the de facto world of complexity, because we're now into the world of off-planet politics. Just
Right.
the fact that we're admitting that UFOs are here and that they're using a type of physics that we don't understand means we're into a complex world, not the complicated world of, steam engines and Tesla cars or Ford diesels, that kind of thing, right?
Right. Can I ask you, before we go too far, this whole idea of hyper novelty, us crossing into this new barrier, it has, in my view, three effects I want to talk about. On one hand, I'm assuming it's going to have an effect on the webbot data and the way it gathers data, because if humans are perceiving their world in a different way, they are also going to emote it in a very different way through their psychic abilities, and the webbot is going to be picking up something different. So one,
Maybe
input,
not. Wait a second. Maybe not pick it up. If in fact
or that,
they start expressing it in a different way, they may not type about it unconsciously. So we have
right?
to allow for that.
Okay, so that's what I mean. So it
Yeah.
might affect the way you're picking up your data and the webbot data. It might also affect the way you're analyzing it, because the lexicon you used 20 or 30 years ago is
Way out of
completely
date.
upended by hyper novelty. And
Right.
three, for humanity in this hyper novelty, I found myself here in the last couple of months also having shows where I'm trying to express an idea that's forming into my mind live during the show, and I just can't, for the love of it, find the words, right? And you
Right.
caught
Right.
me on one of live shows. You're like, JC, of course you can't find the words. It's hyper novel. It hasn't been invented yet, right?
Right.
So humans are going to have to adjust to this and calibrate to this. Your webbot data is going to have to calibrate to this. How do we go through this period of time here where most of the tools by which we analyze and view and input our world to take decisions is completely skewed and upended? Where do we start with that? How do we untangle that? And how long does that last?
Okay, so that how long it lasts is going to depend on the individuals and how rapidly they can adjust and come up with some kind of a methodology or a protocol. It helps to have an internal meditative discipline. Okay, because no matter how wonky things get, you can always pull back into yourself, do your meditation, let the things pass, and see where it resolves. That will be a lot of the hyper novelty. It'll come up looking like a kitty cat, instantly morph into a caterpillar, suddenly change into some kind of a strange fish, and then pass on. I'm using these as analogies. And you could interact with it at any stage, but do you really want to? right? You may just want to sit back and say, you know, those two guys fighting about that over there are not going to get in my way, so I'm just going to let them pass because of what's going on. Now we have to also understand this. Humans are very gullible. The vast majority of the herd of humans, 75% or so, are not awake in a normal sense. They are the normies, and they're not awake in an aware sense of their own minds, their own position in history, what's going on, etc. Right? These are the people we've been trying to wake up to the COVID scam, and look at what a bitch it's been just to get through to the few we've done. Okay, so.
Except I remind you, we're still on YouTube.
Oh, sorry.
Well, actually,
those bastards.
This is a good segue. Oddly enough, though, just the other day, I got a strike removed on my YouTube channel, which had been in place for the last 3 years, and they re-uploaded a video that apparently at the time was inciting violence and promoting weird conspiracy theories. Anyways,
right.
There's weird things happening. So, guys, if you're still watching us here on the YouTube feed, let me bring down the link to you guys here in the live chat so that you can come and join us on Rumble, and we can get Clif to let loose here on all of the amazing linguistics here. Okay, so there's the link there. Let me just remove the YouTube feed now. I'll say good night to all of you